Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Well, the New Year's is upon us, and if you want to start 2019 off with a bang, if you want to start it off right, then sign up for my New Year's Health Transformation. It's going to be awesome. You're going to spend a lot of time with me. It'll be so much fun. You will get more mental clarity, better energy, better sleep, and more joy and vibrance in your life. We're going to get together each week for a live webinar. You can ask me questions. We're going to create health habits that stick. We're going to set up our 2019 off right. So if you're kind of sick of how you've been feeling this month, especially with all the holidays and festivities, and you want to transform your health and get it on track, then join us. It's $37 in the whole month of January. We're going to meet each week and have a fantastic time transforming our health. Do it. It's going to be so much fun. Limited spaces available and enrollment is closing soon. So please visit learntruehealth.com/yes and sign up today. Look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 318. Well, today we are in for such a treat. Naturopaths are my absolute favorite. They're at the top of the pyramid when it comes to holistic health practitioners. So we have my favorite type of holistic health practitioner here today. Nicola Dehlinger is an amazing naturopathic physician. She has a wonderful clinic in Colorado. It is called puravidahealthcare.com. A great website, a great blog. We're going to get into that later. Nicola, I'm so excited to have you here today because you teach a topic that is near and dear to my heart: anxiety, stress, the role that stress plays on the body, and what we can do every day to manage and reduce that stress and eliminate anxiety. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, as you know, because you've actually listened to a few episodes of the show, I'd love to start by learning more about you and your story. Take us back. What happened in your life that led you to want to pursue the career of becoming a naturopathic physician and helping people on every level, on emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, energetic level, to heal their body and help support their body and coming back into balance?
Well, it's funny. It goes way, way back to the beginning of elementary school. And I don't know exactly why we were learning about Freud when I was like 6. But what I remember learning about him, was that he was someone who analyzed dreams to help people feel better. And I remember being really turned on by that concept. Like my whole body kind of lit up. And so as I, kind of went through school, elementary, junior high, high school, I had the laundry list that a lot of kids have. I want to be a journalist. I want to be a doctor. But as I went through high school, I really narrowed it down to I wanted to go into psychiatry. And so I went ahead and started undergrad, and I was doing pre-med, and I'm cruising right along. And to be totally honest, I was kind of hating it. I was having a hard time connecting with my pre-med colleagues. I was studying U.S. healthcare systems as my undergraduate major and was really dissatisfied with what I was learning about our system in this country. And so at the ripe old age of 19, had a little bit of a midlife crisis. And just started to wonder, what do I really want to do? Because this is what I had in my mind since I was really, really little. And I was almost done with my pre-med program. I was halfway through my sophomore year, and I was at a loss. And as the universe would have it, I was back at home for winter break, working at the t-shirt shop I used to work at when I was in high school. And my friend's mom came in, and I had known her really well. And so she starts talking to me, and I'm telling her my woes around how I'm just kind of lost in the world, didn't know what I wanted to do. And she said, you should talk to my doctor. He's a naturopathic doctor and he lives about 45 minutes away, but you should call him. And so, again, at 19 years old, I give him a call, and this guy speaks to me for 90 minutes about what naturopathic medicine is, how it treats the underlying cause, how he's been able to help people that, have seen dozens of specialists and flown all over the world to get medical care, and he's able to help them with generally pretty simple means. And I got off the phone and I was like, oh, I had this moment. I'm like, this is exactly what I want to be doing. Well, it turns out his name is Jim Sensenig, who is one of the founders of kind of modern naturopathic medicine in this country. And I didn't know that at the time. He was one of the founders of our national association. He's kind of one of the big wigs in our profession. And he was so generous with his time. And what's great is that, 6 years later, when I ended up matriculating into naturopathic medical school, he, at my school, taught the very first week and the very last week to all of the students. And so I
Oh,
got to
cool.
see him again and let him know that I was there because of him. And that was really, really special. And then as things evolved for me during medical school, what I was really drawn to was mind-body medicine and really helping to put back together the relationships between our emotions, our mental well-being, and our physical health. And my first job was at an HIV wellness clinic. I speak Spanish, so I was lucky enough to be hired on a little early as a medical assistant. And I got to work in a treatment team at this HIV wellness center with a lot of therapists. And so I really got to hone my skill set around integrating naturopathic medicine and physical health with this mental health component. And then I did that for about 3 years. And then I moved to Durango, Colorado, which is where I still call home, in 2006 to help co-found a wilderness therapy organization called Open Sky. And there, same thing. I was the only naturopathic doc on a treatment team of psychologists and therapists. And that was really exciting to see how blending and incorporating the emotional body really had a huge impact on so many physical complaints, and vice versa. Something that, what we're eating can have a huge impact on, say, anxiety. So this was all unfolding kind of professionally. I found a mentor in mind body medicine, but at the same time in my personal life, I was not really that happy. I was very busy, so I wasn't very in touch with how I was really doing. I had the job, I had the house, I had a husband, we had just had a child, so everything on the outside looked great. But really, what I started realizing is that once I started slowing down, tears were coming to me really easily. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel respected at work. I was in what I now know to be an emotionally abusive marriage. And I started doing a lot of work on me and exploring what it meant to go to those darker places within ourselves that we don't tend to usually want to spend much time with. And so through my own process of traditional therapy, mind body work that I did with my mentor, ritual, ceremony, journaling, reading lots of books, retreats, yoga, meditation, you name it, I started cultivating a relationship with myself. And that relationship with myself was what enabled me to get out of a job that was really kind of tearing me apart on a personal level, get out of a relationship that wasn't really supportive to me on any level, and start realizing all the places in my own world where I carried stress and carried a belief that I just had to push through, carried the belief that I didn't get to take care of myself because that was selfish. And so I just had to sacrifice myself to take care of everybody else around me, be it my clients or my colleagues or my family. And that was a huge, huge time in my life where I made a lot of changes. And then as I was sitting with patients, shortly after I left my former job, I opened a private practice, which is Pura Vida now, and really started sitting with my patients and realizing, the beauty about at least how I practice as a naturopathic doc, and many of us do, is that my initial intake is usually an hour and a half to 2 hours long. So we have a lot of time to sit and really listen to somebody's story. And as I'm sitting and listening to the story, and as I've got my own ego, my own wounded healer more and more in check around, not having to fix it for them, but really being present to them and listening, I'm realizing that they had the keys to their own healing. And so my job got really easy. So at the end of the hour or two, I would just repeat back some things that they said that they knew that they needed, and that where things had started to go differently for them. And they're like, I've been meaning to, go back to yoga, or yeah, maybe this boyfriend isn't as supportive as I thought, or maybe I really hate my job and that's not okay, or I keep on eating dairy even though I know it makes me feel sick, or whatever it was. And so I just repeat, well, maybe you want to consider a different job, or why don't we take out dairy for 30 days? And so really just by listening to people more and more and more deeply, I started realizing how much wisdom each of us brings to the table, but that we don't see because we've been told that we don't know the answers, or that we're in, a culture that says, especially a medical culture that says, we don't know what we're talking about, only the doctor, we have to defer to the doctors and the labs and that sort of stuff. And then out of that came a lot of this work with anxiety and stress, which even if people were coming to see me for hormone balance or digestive issues or whatever, at the core of what was going on was some component of stress and kind of disconnect from our own experience. And what I found is the more I can help people connect more back into themselves, then the less symptoms they have and the more health and vitality they can enjoy in their life.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love how it unfolded for you.
Very
And
much so.
I love that holistic health practitioners always are looking to heal themselves and grow personally, and then reflect those learnings towards helping their patients and their clients. That we're always looking to grow, and we're always looking to see how we can take our own life lessons and help others. And in your case, quieting yourself and listening to your inner wisdom was a lesson that you went, oh, maybe my patients really have the same inner wisdom, and you're listening for it. You're listening for their inner wisdom coming out, and then helping them to see that they do have their answers. And that is perfect, because we keep hearing over and over again that the body speaks to us in symptoms, right? And
Yes.
if we can learn the language of the body, then we can be our own healer, and we really should be. We should always have a team of wonderful practitioners, and I love building a team to support us, but the team should be there to listen to us, right? And to help us hear our own inner wisdom like you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the number one expert on your health and well-being will always be you. Absolutely. And sometimes it's nice to have a guide because we don't know necessarily which way to go. But that, like you said, that guide should be someone who is listening to you and directing from what's happening for you, not from their own agenda. And it's funny in this culture, we think of the body when it's symptomatic as having betrayed us or
Mm.
kind of being dysfunctional. But in what I've come to know in every cell of my body, I have no doubt, is that the body is divinely wise. And so when you have a symptom, that is your body expressing dis-ease in somewhere in the body. And I always use this analogy with my folks, is that if the check engine light in your car went on, you would probably take it to the mechanic. If the mechanic lifted the hood, found the wire to the check engine light, and snipped that wire, closed the hood, and said, "That'll be $500, you'd freak out. You didn't take care of the problem. You just clipped the wire to the check engine light. Something's actually wrong with the engine. But we'd probably pay the $500. If you take your car into the shop, it's hard to get out for less than that. But somehow we come up with the money then and the time to take it in. Well, our body is the vehicle that gets us around every day in every single place that we go, yet we're not necessarily willing to listen in the same way, and we are looking for a medicine that cuts off the wire to the check engine light. We've been taught or acculturated to just make the symptom go away rather than slowing down to get curious around what it might be telling us about
Hmm.
ourselves, our body. Yeah.
It's also our belief system, how we were raised,
Yes.
because the common thing is, oh, I have a thyroid issue, I need to get on thyroid medication, right? Or I have diabetes, I need to get on diabetes medication, right? And so this knee-jerk reaction to get on medication, and it's really interesting that in TV commercials and in the literature and then the mainstream media from a very young age, we're taught a belief system that we have to wait till the body breaks and then go to a doctor and get a medication to, like you said, snip that wire. The medication being something that will suppress a symptom or will somehow push the body to do something, manipulate the body to do
Yes.
something, but does not address the root cause. And medical doctors, and I have a big heart for all doctors because I believe they do genuinely want to help people, but the allopathic medical system is set up in a way that does not empower medical doctors to look to the root cause, to find the root cause, and to support the body's ability to heal itself. It's designed to sell drugs and surgery. And so
Right.
we have an entire population, global population that has been raised to believe that we need a drug. I mean, how brilliant was their marketing in the last 150 years to convince us that our old world, quote unquote, I'm doing like little air quotes, you can't see it obviously, old world medicine is outdated and we need the new science to come in, and because this pill is smarter than nature, right? It's just
Right.
kind of ridiculous. Then so we have to look at our own programming and look at our own belief system and start questioning everything, like start questioning our own belief system about how we handle anxiety and stress, how we created the diet we eat now. Oh, this is just the way my family eats, or this is the way I was raised to eat, or this is just easy for me to eat. Well, food is our fuel. Food is our medicine. Food is our fuel. So we need to look at, well, why do I eat this way? And what beliefs do I have around food? What beliefs do I have around my own emotional health and my own support system for supporting my body in these times, like you said, yoga, or, going for a walk, or evaluating the emotional health of a relationship.
We're saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's a huge, huge issue. And I think back to when I was a small kiddo, we had a family practice that we went to. There were two doctors, Dr. Crossman and Dr. Malloy, and I'm talking 40 years ago, and I remember their names. And what was great is that we generally saw Dr. Crossman, but they knew all of us. So my dad had 5 kids, and my mom's worrying about his hearing, and so she sends him into Dr. Crossman. Dr. Crossman does a full exam, and he's got 20 minutes to spend with my dad. He's listening. He's like, "Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you know you've got selective hearing." You've got 5 kids. You just tune them out. Like, you just tune out whatever's happening when you're watching the news or reading the paper. Your hearing is totally fine. But in this day and age where we don't have that doctor that's known us for 20 years and doesn't know how many kids we have or anything about our home life, and we
Mm.
see a different provider every time we go in, and if we want to see the provider we saw last time, we have to book at least 3 months out to get that person. It changes the relationship. And
Mm.
so much of understanding this complex machine that we call our body is being in relationship to it. So if our providers aren't in relationship to my unique body, then they're not going to be as equipped to effectively handle it, even if pharmaceuticals are required, because they're not going to know me. They're not going to know that I'm sensitive to this, or that, for example, like I usually need twice as much Novocaine as the average person when I go to the dentist, but I know that about my body, and now my dentist knows that too. But again, if I'm seeing a new dentist every 6 months, when I actually go every 6 months, then they don't know that about me, and I need to then advocate for myself. But in this fast-paced medical kind of the HMO based medical system that we found ourselves in here, the doctors, even if they're willing, don't necessarily have the ability to listen and to follow through and to call your nephrologist or your GI doc and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And that's a huge part of what I do is, oh, you've got a cardiologist and a GP, great, sign a release, and I need to talk to them and let them know, A, what we're doing, and B, find out, is this really necessary?
I love it. So you coordinate with all of the other practitioners and pull them together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What we want to look for when we're hiring our practitioner advocate for us, like a naturopath to hire to work with us, is one that will coordinate with our other team members, right? With all of our other doctors, because there's information my chiropractor might give you or my dentist might give you, and
Yes.
that would alter the whole, my whole protocol. So I love that you bring that up, because I think it's really important we make sure that we're advocating for ourselves, and two, that the practitioners that we choose, we know are going to communicate with each other. So I love that you
Right.
brought that up.
And be open-minded. You don't, as a, allopathically trained medical doctor, you might not know a ton about vitamins and herbs and amino acids, and that's fine, because I probably don't know as much about pharmaceuticals. So it's not that your GP has to know everything about alternative medicine, but just be open and trust that there's another way that can be of assistance to the health of this person, and then be respectful of your choice as a patient, that, what, naturopathic medicine is my first choice, but I want my allopath as a backup. I've had, cancer patients who have come in and said, I'm doing chemo, I don't want to talk about that, but I want your support through it. And I'm like, great, I can help you not feel so nauseous and help you deal with the emotional stuff that's bound to come up as you go through chemo. So it's not up to me to decide for the patient, well, did you know X, Y, and Z about chemo? And I wouldn't recommend it. If they've come in already decided, it's my job to get on board.
Yeah. Yeah. And support them as best you can.
Absolutely.
I
Because
love
I
it.
don't know what's best. And to be honest, I've seen, some people, generally husbands dragged in by their wives, who don't necessarily believe in alternative medicine, and it's never as good of a fit. I don't ever get the results, because what your belief system that you're bringing to the table is as important as anything else. And if you believe that, you know, rattles and sweat lodges and that sort of stuff are going to heal you, then honestly, it's very unlikely that anything else will. And if you've decided that chemo is the only thing that's going to help, then it probably will be, right? So you get to choose, as the patient, as the client, as the consumer, what really resonates for you, and don't let anybody else, allopathic or alternative, make you wrong for it.
It's really neat that, we just need to have enough open-mindedness, enough, we can have our skepticism, but have enough open-mindedness that our body has the ability to heal itself, and that with natural medicine, we can support it to nudge it in that direction, and the body will take over. And that's what we're looking for. And today I really wanted to get into stress, because we don't feel stress until we're like about to break.
Right.
There's no stress. I actually had a client that I said, I kept telling her, like, every week, we need you. My homework for you this week is to practice daily. Like these 5 different things I wanted her to do throughout the day to manage her stress. She had a lot going on, and she just stopped one time and said, I don't feel stress. Like, I don't have stress. I don't feel it. And I said, oh, I'm so glad you said this. It just clicked for me. I go, stress isn't an emotion. We don't
Right.
feel like I feel love, I feel anger. We don't feel quote unquote stress until it is completely, you're about to snap, like until it's a
Right.
panic attack. I've actually had panic attacks, and I didn't even know I was stressed then. I'm like, oh, what's going on? Why can't I breathe? Why am my palms sweating? Why am I having a hot flash? Why am I getting dizzy and nauseous and I need to sit down?
Yeah.
I looked up all my symptoms. Oh, wow, that
Right.
was a panic attack. And then I had to start to do the emotional work to realize what was going on. And then I realized I had stressed myself out so much that my body was saying, I am going to literally faint if you don't handle
Yeah.
this stress.
If you don't stop you, I'm going to stop you.
Exactly. So
Hmm.
we want to like back up, way back up to where stress is just starting to creep up a little bit, instead of, and handle it then, instead of handle it when it's breaking our body, it's breaking our adrenals and our hormones and everything. But I'd love for you to discuss stress and teach us what it is, how we can detect it. Are there any ways to measure stress? Like, are there lab tests? Are there any ways at home that we could measure stress, or ways, going to a lab or go to a doctor, that we could measure stress to see if what we're doing is helping to reduce it, or just know, like, what direction are we going in?
Sure. Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I'm so glad you're bringing this up because in our culture, we don't get praised for acknowledging stress because it's like, suck it up, buttercup. It's everybody's stressed and everybody's got too much to do. And I think I've seen this an uptick, I would say, in the past 10 to 15 years as our economy has shifted, where, jobs are being downsized, people are expected to do more. Lunch breaks are a thing of the past, or if you have a lunch break, well, now you come in 8 to 5 to make up for the hour that you take, and then nobody takes it anyway. So now you're working 9 hours a day. I mean, it's become, and then the pace in which we communicate now between text and social media and IM and emails, we're expected to process about 1,000 times more pieces of information in a day than we were about 20 to 25 years ago. And so even that, even technology, the input, even if you love technology, I'm a bit of a technophobe, but for some people, they absolutely love whatever technology is bringing into their world. But there's still a certain physiological stressor of receiving information and having a ping. Every time we have one of those ding, we get a little release of dopamine, which is fine. But when you're getting 50, 100, 200 pings of dopamine in a day, and then you haven't spent any time outside or exercising, then my question is how are we replacing that dopamine that has been depleting in small amounts all day? And so what happens is that we're running ourselves down in such kind of small increments that it's kind of like that old metaphor around, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you put a frog in lukewarm water and slowly turn the heat up, it'll stay in and get boiled. And I think that pretty much sums up most of the people that I know in our culture, is there's just been so much stress, but it's accumulated over time, and we just keep piling more and more and more onto our plate until our natural state of being is 3 cups of coffee to just get out of the house in the morning. And it's and we're not sleeping well, but I've learned how I do really well on 5 hours of sleep a night is what I hear all the time. Even though our physiological normal is 9 hours, folks, not 8.
Mm.
9 hours is really optimal. And I know very few people who are getting that these days, partially because they don't think that they need it, or they've gotten used to it, or they can't receive it. They have a hard time falling asleep or wake in the night. And so what's happening is and then we look around and we compare, right? Well, I'm not as stressed as this person, or I don't have it as bad as that person. And then we start disconnecting from our experience because it's normalized everywhere we look.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start normalizing a collective experience, then all of a sudden nobody's talking about it anymore. But when I sit down to give a lecture or a podcast or sit down one-on-one with my patients and we start talking about stress, it's not so what I'm seeing. And so you ask, like, how do we notice stress in our body if we don't think that we're stressed, or or it's more what I see is, yeah, I'm stressed, but it's not impacting me. Like I can definitely handle it. Kind of this very
Macho.
yeah, masculine energy. And it's not just in men. Women are definitely adopting much more masculine energy. And it's kind of this do, go, 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 push, push, push is the masculine. And the feminine, and this is not male, female, this is masculine, feminine. The feminine essence is slow down, rest, receive, like let the field go fallow for the winter so that it can then regrow in
Mm-hmm.
the spring. That's why, we're not supposed to be pregnant all the time. Why, we don't get our period right away after we, give birth. It's because the body, the earth, the everything, if you're a hardcore athlete and you don't take time to recover, or, if you are a weightlifter and you do arms 4 days in a row, you haven't given those muscles time to rest and repair themselves. And so you're actually now doing damage. And so it's funny I gave a talk at my gym a couple weeks ago, and it's a CrossFit gym. So there's very highly motivated and weight-oriented folks there. And, I was talking to them about this idea of not resting, or if, they had to do quads, all week long. And everyone's like, well, I would never do that. And it's like, right. But so then why are you doing it to yourself at work and at home? And, so it's interesting how we don't see it and we don't equate it. But hopping back over to the symptoms that I see most frequently that people will identify with, but not necessarily identify as stressed, is overwhelm. I hear that a ton. I just feel overwhelmed all the time, or I'm, or during the season especially, I feel really overwhelmed. Another one that I very commonly see is I'm just not as sharp cognitively as I'm used to being. I'm not remembering stuff as well. I'm having to read things more than once to retain it. I'm using more notes and sticky notes. And I'm looking at my desk and noticing the sticky notes as I'm telling you this. That's something that I hear all the time. Insomnia or some issue with sleep. Again, not kind of being that wired and tired, or waking in the night. I have a lot of people who wake up in the night, once or twice to urinate, and they're like, oh, that's just normal for me, and I have to pee, so I wake up. And I'm here to tell you that if you were sleeping well, your bladder wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
wake you up. What happens is we wake up and then our bladder cues us in. And you'll know this if you've ever had a really hard night's sleep and you wake up in the morning and your bladder's like on fire. You think you're gonna explode. You're not sure you could make it to the bathroom to get up. Those nights. Have you ever had those?
Oh yeah, I had one this morning.
Okay,
I
great.
was like,
Beautiful.
I
I'm
don't know if I'm gonna
thrilled for
make
you.
it.
Yeah. So if the bladder was waking us up, it would have woken you up hours prior. It wasn't gonna. So it's really so that peeing in the night is really an indicator of sleep quality, unless there's a prostate issue, which of course sometimes happens. But for the most part, what I see is an indicator of sleep. So those are the types of things that I look for. Oh, and having a hard time getting out of bed. I used to jump out of bed in the morning, and now I really need to drag myself, or I hit snooze 3 or 4 times, or a heavy reliance on caffeine to get things going in the morning. And then some more subtle things that I'll see certainly are digestive changes, not just diarrhea. I think a lot of people associate diarrhea with stress, and certainly that can happen. But a lot of times I'll see constipation as well. And part of that is because we don't have enough energy to wake up early enough to have morning routines like 5 minutes of stretching and a nice glass of warm lemon water before your coffee, and a breakfast that you actually sit down and chew. Most people don't have those morning routines. And when we don't give our body a chance to wake up, kind of what you were talking about before. There's the parasympathetic, or the relax, the rest and digest part of that nervous system. And there's the sympathetic, which is that fight or flight. So if we wake up and we hit the ground running, all of our sphincters are going to either open and then close. So we're going to, go to the bathroom and then kind of not be able to go for the rest of the day, or they don't ever relax and they just kind of close up. And part of that is a survival thing, because if you're fighting or running from a saber-toothed tiger, you don't have, it's not in your evolutionary survival interest to have to stop and poop, so we kind of shut everything down. We're also not worried about, making babies during that time. So our reproductive organs get shut down. We're not really worried about, monitoring our metabolism, so our thyroid gets shut down. So we kind of have to think about all of these physiological components that the sympathetic nervous system does in order for us to fight or flee, and realize that, we were designed to be in that fight or flight around 10% of the time. And whenever I say that, most people just laugh, because they feel like they're in that fight or flight 80, 90, if not 100% of their day. And just physiologically, that has a huge impact on blood sugar metabolism, cholesterol and lipid metabolism, blood flow. We actually shunt blood away from the part of our brain that helps us to learn and think and remember. And we shunt it towards the amygdala, which is that reptilian part of the brain that just has us be hypervigilant and just worried about survival.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that we can actually reverse all of this, even the brain stuff. For a long time we thought neurological issues were irreversible, but now we know that the brain has more plasticity than we first thought. But over time, what will happen is that that front part of your cerebrum will actually get smaller, and the amygdala will actually get bigger.
Whoa.
So now we're going to start perceiving our world as a scarier place, because that hypervigilant part of the brain is starting to overdevelop.
Do you see that more with people who had adverse childhood events, so that children, or as children into our early adult life, we were under stressful situations, that they developed that enlarged amygdala, so that the rest of their life they're going to sort of have that heightened state of anxiety?
Yes, absolutely. So there's one of the biggest studies, medical studies, that I've ever seen, was over 18,000 individuals, and this was in this adverse childhood events, or ACE study. And so about almost 20,000 people were asked about, a history of child abuse or dysfunctional family life. And for the folks that reported one or more negative event in their history, there was an increased risk of disease, disability. There was even premature death by 10 years, which is really, really, really significant. And if there were more than 4 of these adverse childhood events, they were more likely to have behaviors as adults that were contributing to a more dangerous lifestyle, like smoking, or 12 times more likely to have attempted suicide, more likely to be an alcoholic, more likely to have been, using IV drugs. So there's a huge, huge, huge list of behavioral things, but then also, a tendency to be in abusive relationships, to become obese, both heart disease, liver, and lung disease like COPD, and liver disease, certainly a higher risk for depression, and just kind of an overall lower health and vitality, and as relates to quality of life.
Hmm. And are those people lost causes, or?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. No, not at all. And that's what's really fascinating, is that once we start realizing that chronic diseases in adults could be determined by their early experiences of childhood, then we can start working with that. And so there's a lot of movement in the psychological community to help integrate, and you'll probably see this across the country, integrate behavioral health and regular medical health care, and make sure that there's always a behavioral health person on the team of, so we're working in pods and we are working with the same provider over and over, so they know our history and can maybe help start put those pieces together. I know my sister is a psychologist in outside of Sacramento, and she actually works at a medical school training the residents in how to interview patients and work with them, work with trauma, addiction, that sort of stuff. But then also how to interview and ask these questions, because unfortunately, a lot of our medical providers were never taught how to ask more
Mm.
personal questions. And so there's this kind of double-edged shame thing where the patient's embarrassed to acknowledge something, and then the doctor doesn't necessarily want to pry and ask something offensive. And so both parties remain silent around things that could be having a real impact on somebody's actual physiological health and chronic disease. Yeah. And then, we see some adverse events as well when people have childhood events, of abuse and trauma. And we really see the neurodevelopment shift, and we can have, emotional, cognitive, and social impairment later in life. So it's not just in the physical body, it's certainly in the emotional and mental bodies as well.
And the good news is that there is hope.
Yes, there absolutely is hope. And so what happens is when we start addressing the history of abuse or trauma, and we start exploring that, and really, what I do in the mind body work that I do that I think is so important is, just help people tell their story in a safe way. Because what happens when we have something upsetting happen to us, be it a capital T trauma or a little t trauma, is that if nobody's there to help us integrate that experience, then it becomes a glitch in our system, a glitch in the matrix, if you will. And so we start tripping over that disintegrated experience, and then it kind of forms a solid memory that when something else happens, or someone talks to us in a certain way, or maybe looks a certain way, or reminds us in any way of that event that happened, and that could be something as severe as sexual abuse as a child, or it could be as mild as being reprimanded by a teacher. We all imprint these traumatic events in our own way, and it doesn't necessarily one doesn't necessarily have more harm than the other. And we can't integrate that experience. And so all of a sudden, all these other experiences that we have in an adult body or an adult experience, it's kind of like pulls on a string of the web, and then the whole web starts shaking again. The whole system gets reactivated. And so what we can do by helping someone be more present to what their history is really help them to acknowledge, wow, this was really impactful, and this is how I felt, and this is what was happening for me. I do a lot of works with internal family systems. It's the work of Dick Schwartz, and he talks a lot about parts. So there's a part of me that felt this, and there's a part of
Mm-hmm.
me that felt that. And so that's a really safe way of approaching it, because it's not like I'm feeling this. It's, you as a resourced adult can show up for that little kid who's suffering and help them work through it. And then you see an instant transmutation of physical and emotional symptoms as we start unpacking these things. And it's a little bit different than traditional talk therapy, in that I know a lot of people have shared with me, and my own experience was, talk therapy was great for intellectually unbraiding what had happened, but I still felt in my cellular body or in my emotional body like, well, I still feel the same. So my first time I did committed therapy, and I was in it for months and months, every single week, no matter what. We were probably about 9 months in, and my therapist's name is Maureen, and I just looked at her and I said, Maureen, we've been at this for a long time, and I'm still the same person. And she like doubles over laughing. She's like, oh, honey, did you think you were here to be different? And I said, yeah, that's exactly why I'm here, And she's like, oh, no, you're not here to have to change who you are. You're here to be in relationship with who you are differently. Oh my goodness. I was so angry. I like left. I didn't come back for weeks. I was just totally pouting about this. Like, felt like I had been scammed. Like, if I'm not here to get perfect, then what is the point? But really now that I have a little more experience under my belt, what I understand is that we can't change our past, but we can change how we relate to it by bringing it out of the closet and into the light.
I love that you work with these tools that provide people with these amazing breakthroughs emotionally. Can you tell us what is the connection between emotional health and physical health?
Everything. It has everything to do with everything. And what we don't realize is we talk about stress management and meditation or massage or whatever as these like floofy, nice things that if only I had time to do in my life, wouldn't that be great? But that would also indicate that I have a different life because I couldn't possibly do that and live the stressed life that I have now. And this kind of goes on a little bit of a rant of mine around the busyness culture that we've created, like busy, 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 and so busy, even on Facebook, like, look at how busy I was this weekend doing this and then this and then this and then this,
Mm-hmm.
where we just really don't value rest and not sleep, but rest, like the lack of doing something while awake. And so what happens is that when there is an energetic shift in the body, and this is basic physiology, it's funny because, a lot of people are like, oh, that's just woo-woo stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's woo-woo stuff based in cellular physiology. It's just what happens. There's an energetic shift that happens, and then that creates a chemical shift, and then that chemical shift creates a physiological shift. That's how, I mean, you open up any Physiology 101 textbook, and that's exactly how cell-to-cell communication happens. That's how cells enter, substances enter in and out of the cells. And so we have to let go of this idea that our mental bodies aren't impacting our physiology. What's fascinating, there was a great study that took a group of people out to a meditation center for one day, not 10 years or 6 months, but one day. And they split the group into two. And one group just kind of casually strolled around the grounds. And the other group, on and off for 8 hours, engaged in mindfulness practices, be it meditation, sitting, walking, yoga, that sort of thing. And they looked at their COX-2 genes. The COX-2 genes, I don't know if you remember Celebrex and pharmaceuticals like that were like the be all and end all and anti-inflammatory meds for a minute until they realized how dangerous they were. But for a second, they were really important medication because the COX-2 gene is an inflammation gene. And so they've actually measured the levels of COX-2 genes at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, there was a significant reduction in the expression of the COX-2 gene in the mindfulness-based group as compared to the control. So it doesn't have it. If you've been the way that you are for 60 years, it can change. It can change now. If you've never done anything like this, that's okay. If you don't have 2 hours a day to dedicate to a yoga and meditation practice, that's okay. But if you've got 5 minutes and you can use an app or you can just follow the inhale and exhale of your breath, you're actually going to change how your genes express themselves. And it actually creates what they call mitochondrial resilience. Because what happens is there's some cellular processes that get stabilized to the adaptation of oxidative stress, and that in turn enhances cell survival and cell function. And the more we practice, the more of these mitochondrial positive changes we see occur. And what happens is that these are the core cellular changes that are creating a broad base of shifting, and that's how the mind-body body effects of doing something like relaxation. And so when we have better molecular resilience, we will see more physiological, medical, and psychiatric resilience.
That is fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that gene a bit more? Is that epigenetics to see a gene shift so quickly
Yeah.
based on
Yes.
one, change in input?
Yes, exactly. And so what epigenetics means, and so epi means upon, and so basically we all know that we all carry essentially the same genes, more or less. And the question of why does one person in a family get cancer and the other person doesn't, even though they're both carriers of this gene, is this idea of epigenetics. So what makes the gene turn on or turn off? And so what we are discovering is that so much of what causes things to turn on and off is environmental and stress related, and that we have infinitely more control over what we consider genetic illness than we thought. And this can go for fibromyalgia, chronic pain, arthritis, diabetes, chronic fatigue, chemical sensitivity, cardiovascular issues. There's so many different individual disease states that have been studied, and they all find that mindfulness-based practices, relaxation-based practices had a positive impact across the board. And that's what's fascinating about this mitochondrial resilience kind of body of work, is that now we're understanding from a medical or physiological standpoint what's actually happening here is this idea of we're changing our gene expression, or we're playing with epigenetics.
That's so cool. I just love it. That's something like, because some people think, oh, I have to meditate for weeks or months before it has an impact. But you're saying one day. Now, did they meditate for like the whole day, or if someone sat down and meditated for 5 minutes a day, just to get started, would
Yes.
that have an impact that is measurable and that is
Yes.
that is worth it? Because some people are like, I'm too busy, but you're saying, but 5 minutes is actually going to save you like so much more time.
Yeah, we'll probably give you more time in your life. Like, we'll probably give you more
Right.
years. So you don't have the time not to do this, really. I mean, from the body of research, and what's fascinating is that ACE study I was referencing before. Do you know when that came out? It was 1998.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this is not new information. I mean, it's building and building and building, and there's, tons of books, but it's fascinating. I mean, they're looking at women with breast cancer, and they're finding that women who feel more socially connected are infinitely less likely to metastasize as women with the same exact genetic expression who feel socially isolated. So the women that feel
Mm.
isolated are much, much more likely to metastasize. They're looking at PTSD and firemen, and what can we do for, I mean, these are, these are very, I don't know what else to say, but real cases, where we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about cancer or PTSD from being a fireman for 30 years. um, we can reverse that with these very simple techniques, and the more you practice, the more benefit you will receive. And what
Mm-hmm.
I find that's, in my own practice, which is up and down, admittedly, um, is that if I can start my day with even 10 minutes on my yoga mat, or even 5 minutes of just reaching my hands up over my head and touching my toes and repeating that 3 times, and then maybe sit down and take 10 mindful inhales and exhales, my whole day is colored in a different way. And so what's interesting to me about that is that I'm much more likely to take 3 deep breaths throughout the day. Especially, my challenge to myself always is to take 3 breaths before I eat. Just become aware, because normally I move pretty quick. I'm a New Englander, I'm an East Coaster. I move fast in the world. It's part of how I was acculturated. But in order for the body to be able to receive food, we have to be more in that parasympathetic state. And so if we are kind of cruising through our day and just shoving food down our gullet, then we're going to have a hard time receiving that food and extracting all the nutrients because we're not clicking over into parasympathetic. So can you take 3 deep breaths before you sit down to start a meal? Can you put your fork down between bites? These are mindfulness practices. And if I start my day with 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, I am infinitely more likely to continue that practice throughout the day. But even if I only do that one small practice in the morning, it's going to weave into all my other activities for the rest of the day and help me have more resilience so that I can be in my stressful or very full day at work, say, and not flip over from stress into panic or crisis.
Mm-hmm. I have a client who was telling me that she learned some really, she told me, oh, there's some things I've learned in your podcast that have just been life-changing. I'm like, oh, like what?
Do tell,
And
yeah.
do tell, yeah. And she goes, well, I noticed that, and she didn't really understand at the time that it was stress, but she goes, because she owns her own business, and she's a mother of 2 young kids, and a wife. So she has, she has a lot of responsibilities, and she was finding that she noticed that when she went to write an email, that her brain was so foggy, it would take like way more time to write it, and just felt like tasks that normally she could whiz through in her business were taking a lot longer. And then she heard me say that my husband and I are very intentional with every morning having like this tickle fight, and like we'll make a sandwich of like all 3 of us hug each other, our son and my husband and I. And we just spend a few minutes, like that's how we start our day, like laughing and tickling. And our son loves to tickle, and so we have this playtime first thing in the morning. It's a way that we as a family unite in the morning. We laugh and we decrease stress. There's so much, it's so great for decreasing stress and setting the tone for the day. And so she started doing that, and she started noticing. So she put she's having problems writing this email. She just says, you know what? I can send out the email tomorrow. It's not going to be the end of the world. I'm going to go play with my kids. Awesome. And then she noticed that when she, set down the laptop and said, okay, you know what? Work is done. Now it's time to spend with the kids. Where's the great life with her kids if she's always working, or if she's so stressed out that she's not with them, and she creates disease in her body because she's so stressed out? So she goes, she gets it. Like the light bulb went off. She put the laptop down. She played with her kids. And then she noticed that as that is a routine, that doing that, taking that time off, often to play with her kids, that she became more efficient at work.
Yes.
She could get her stuff done faster, get more time with her kids. And that's exactly what you said, that when we're in stress mode, because the body shunts blood away from the logic centers of the brain to support the fight or flight systems, then we are trying, it's like we're Sisyphus, like pushing the stone
Yes.
up the hill ever more, because if you're trying to write an email or do your QuickBooks in stress mode, it's sort of like blindfolded, because we do not have access to the logic centers of our brain.
Right. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the what we've been taught, though, is we have to push through. We have to push through. And what people more and more are finding is when you actually stop and don't push through, then you come back to your task infinitely more refreshed. There's a reason that, high school classes and therapy sessions are 50 minutes. It's because about every hour, our brain wants to do something new. It's why kids start staring out the window at school when they've been, kind of kept on one task for too long. We instantly want to do something else, and it doesn't have to be something big. You could get up and touch your toes, or go get yourself a glass of water, or let yourself, go to the bathroom because you've had to pee for the past 3 hours, but you're like, just one more email. And but we do this to ourselves all the time, and this is how we start the process of disconnecting. We don't respond to our body when it's thirsty or hungry or needs to use the bathroom or is tired or is bored or is unsatisfied. And we learn that from a very, very young age. it's part of how school is, and desks in a line and chairs, and there's this order that gets imprinted on us from a very, very young age, where individual expression isn't always considered appropriate at the vast majority of schools. There's certainly exceptions.
Well, the Prussian education system was designed to make good little factory workers. So we wanted to take critical thinking out, and we wanted to
Yes.
stop individualized self-expression so we could make drones. And that is the history of our current education system. So when when we go, like you said, when we need to go to the bathroom, we need to stretch, or we need to get a glass of water, or we need to just shift our mind for a minute and do something else, that is frowned upon in the Prussian education system. And so for years and years and years, we're taught to stop listening to our body, which is just
Yes.
crazy.
Yes, absolutely. And then we wonder why we didn't know we were stressed. Like, I mean, now it's so interesting because I have a pretty lengthy intake form, and I'll have so many people fill out stuff and they're like, oh, but I mean, I've had headaches for 20 years, so that's not really why I'm here. It's like that's just part of my norm. Or I'd forgotten that was a thing until you had me check the box on an intake form, because we just because it becomes our norm doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make it physiological normal, but we become very, very used to living with physical, mental, or emotional pain and discomfort.
Yep.
And then we choose to distract, be it with sugar or caffeine or alcohol or television or shopping, or pick your poison. But we use all these things. Certainly social media has become a huge way people just disconnect from that feeling of exhaustion or overwhelm. And not to say that social media or Netflix or whatever are not great tools, but when we use them intentionally, like last night, I was like, I just want to turn on some terrible television. And I made a very intentional choice. But I had eaten dinner, I had exercised earlier in the day. Like there were other things that I had done. And I felt like, I could do yoga right now. That might be nice. And I'm like, honestly, I just want to zone out. And I did. It was a conscious choice. But many of us are making these choices without really thinking about it or having any intention or having any sort of commitment to come back at another time and handle it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. What did you end up watching?
Oh God, Empire. It's so bad. Oh my God, it's like the worst soap opera ever, but
Oh,
it's very distracting. Like, oh
right?
my gosh, is she really going to throw over the roof? I don't know. I have to find out tonight. Um, you know, she's pregnant. How could she throw her over the roof? Yeah. But it's important too to start connecting in with other people. And again, I think this has been one of the detriments of, technology and social media, is that we're constantly telling our selfie story, but we're not really necessarily touching into our truth. And we're
Mm.
not really necessarily telling our story. And there's actually something called narrative medicine, which is the medicine that comes from simply telling your story. And not only does that create meaning and context and aha moments, but when we use our words to name our experience, what we do is we activate that prefrontal cortex, that thing that gets shut down when we're stressed. And when with that prefrontal cortex is activated, we actually start to calm the amygdala, which is really great. If you remember, that's that fight or flight, that
Mm-hmm.
reptilian part of the brain. And then when we start to calm the amygdala, then we free up our brain's energy to have creativity and mindsight and insight. And then if somebody's listening to us in an empathetic way and maybe nodding and following along with us, we are start to resonate without words, and that helps the brain return to a calm state as well. And so what's fascinating is that simply telling your story to a friend, a partner, a therapist, a naturopathic doc trained in mind body medicine, is that we can just simply telling your story can actually grow new neural connections between that prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And so when we were talking earlier around like, well, I've been stressed out for so long, I don't even know what to do. Like, consider some of these things, be it, and if sitting on a cushion and meditating isn't your thing, that's okay. You could walk mindfully and just pay attention. With my kiddos that I work with, I'll have them put their favorite stuffed animal or teddy bear on their tummy and just watch it rise and fall. There's a ton of different apps and online applications that can really help if you really don't know where to get started. But there's something out there that will resonate for you. And just because your neighbor had this transcendental experience with one doesn't mean it's going to be your thing. And if it isn't, it doesn't mean that you should just stop trying. Like, continue to check some stuff out.
There are so many different forms of meditation. I think people just think, oh, it's just kind of, you just sit there and it's boring. And then you have to like have your mind empty, but then thoughts keep coming in. And I've
Right.
been going to these meditation classes, and I've studied meditation on and off throughout my life, all different forms of it. And what is really great is this simple exercise of imagining yourself by a river, and you're just, you're calm, empty your mind. And anytime something comes in, like, oh, I should cook this, or oh, I need to buy that, or I need to email this person, like whatever thoughts, you put it into the river and you watch it go down the river and just go away. And you're like, bye bye. And then you
Oh, I
just get
love
back
that.
to being calm, and something else comes up. Like in it sometimes it's annoying because it's like every 5 seconds your brain wants to talk, and you just say, I put it in the river, and you watch it flow away. And then you just come back to your body, you just come back to your breath, feel the sensation of air moving into your nostrils as you breathe. And you just keep putting those thoughts in the river. So anytime something comes up, so instead of getting super frustrated, like, oh, I'm supposed to be quiet but my mind keeps talking, just put it in the river, watch it float away, come back to your breath. And it goes by so fast. Like, I did an hour meditation last night, and I'm like, I could not believe an hour went by.
Oh, it's so
And
good.
I was the kind of person who I'm like, you want me to meditate for 5 minutes? Are you kidding me? I'm going to go crazy. Like,
Hmm.
so I was one of those people who just like could not sit still for 5 minutes. And now an hour feels like it's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm so much calmer and healthier. It brings down blood pressure. Let's talk about the, physiological benefits of decreasing stress. Like, what are some real, like, people are like, oh my gosh, I need to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. There's a little image that I have of a person, and where stress affects, and like the whole body is lit up. From the digestive system to the reproductive system to your bone density to your muscle mass, to your immune system. I think this is part of why we're having so much autoimmune issues in our
Mm.
in our culture. Is that cortisol has a huge impact. It has two main roles in the body. One is to manage stress, and the other is to manage inflammation. So if anybody's needed a steroid and you look at the actual pharmacy label, it'll say hydrocortisone or corticosteroid. So it has that cortisone, cortico, that comes from cortisol. And so our cortisol in our body is meant to primarily help regulate inflammation and therefore the immune system, because the inflammation cascade is a huge part of the immune system. And so, but evolutionarily, our body is going to preferentially give the cortisol down that stress management pathway to help us deal with the incoming email or the overwhelm or the whatever. And we won't have as much cortisol dedicated to the management of inflammation, because if you're being chased by the saber-toothed tiger and your knee is a little inflamed, it's not as important as you mobilizing all of the different parts of your body to get away. And so I think we have to consider, if you have any sort of condition that has an inflammatory component, and at this point, I think we understand that any chronic condition has an inflammatory component, including depression and anxiety, including the mental health chronic diseases. There's a component where managing your stress more actively will have a benefit, because it's reducing the burden on the cortisol, so that you have more cortisol to effectively manage your inflammation and your immune system, so that your autoimmune and too much inflammation doesn't get kicked in.
Does stress cause inflammation?
Yes.
Got it. And can you, for those who don't know, I mean, I think everyone knows, ooh, inflammation bad, but can you
Right.
explain why do we want to always lower inflammation? What does inflammation do to the body? Like, so like high stress causes systemic inflammation. Why do we want to lower that?
So, it's funny because I think a lot of times, I'll use a sprained ankle. It's like, oh, there's inflammation. We want to ice it. And yeah, we don't necessarily always want to move against inflammation. That response of the body to send extra cells and neutrophils, and it's keeping that joint protected until it can heal. And over time, that inflammation will go down on its own once the joint has restored itself to balance and to harmony. And that's what we in naturopathic medicine call the vis medicatrix naturae, which is the inherent healing power of nature, which is if we were to get out of our body's way, it's going to always restore balance. And inflammation is no different. So I think we talk about anti-inflammatory diets and anti-inflammatory supplements and how much turmeric can you eat in a day, because we want to get rid of this inflammation. Well, inflammation is actually a huge part of our repair system in our body. Where we get into trouble is when that repair system never gets shut off. And so now we have inflammation in our gut or inflammation in our brain and nervous system. And that can underlie other disease states like, say, Parkinson's or irritable bowel syndrome or cardiovascular disease. And so every body is going to have a different system that's, what I would call weaker or more at risk. And that tends to be, where we will find more of this inflammation lying. Like in my body, I tend to get more issues in my gut than I do in my joints. And so we have to look at that, what am I eating that's causing that maybe I'm sensitive to, that's creating more inflammation in my system as a whole. And so when we have inflammation that won't turn off, then we have an overactive immune system, and it makes it far more likely that we will either start attacking ourselves with an autoimmune issue such as lupus or Hashimoto's, or that overactive immune system is now no longer fighting off specific invaders or monitoring things like, we all basically, cancer is just when the cell's gene that reproduces that cell doesn't get shut off. And so we stop doing what's called apoptosis, or the breaking down of the cells. And so when our immune system is overactivated, it's kind of like if you had to be hypervigilant to what your son was doing in the whole house and working at the same time, that would be infinitely harder than you having him in one room of the house and not working, right? Because you have a smaller area to focus in on. And so our body is the same as far as the inflammation goes and the immune system goes. And so what happens is that we have more likelihood of developing cancer in our body because the mechanisms that regulate cell birth and cell death aren't, they get the lines of communication get a little bunged up.
Got it. And are there tests that, so like, are there blood tests that people can take to measure their stress levels? Like cortisol, would cortisol measure their stress level? Would inflammation measure their stress level?
Sure.
Are there
Yeah.
other things that we can do, both lab work, and is there anything we can do at home to measure our stress so that we
Sure.
can, first we want to know where we are, and then we want to take action, and then we want to see how far we've come, right?
Yeah, always, because sometimes we don't feel it in our body when we're getting better. So yeah, certainly there's just regular blood work that you can do, looking at CRP, which stands for C-reactive protein. You can look at SED rate, which is sedimentation rate, or ESR. These are just generalized markers of inflammation. But I'll tell you, most of the time, these markers come back negative, even if I strongly suspect inflammation in one part of the body or another. What I primarily use to help people that I feel like are running too stressed is a saliva cortisol test, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the your cortisol and your reproductive hormones, for that matter, are much more bioavailable, and they're in their more bioavailable form in the saliva. In the blood, they're in their non-bioavailable or bound form, and so it doesn't give us as accurate a read if we do a serum or a blood test for reproductive and cortisol or adrenal hormones. Um, Thyroid hormone and things like that, that's totally fine to do through the blood. And then the other thing is that most people don't like getting their blood drawn. And so if I go in to get my blood drawn, I'm going to have a natural spike in my cortisol level because I'm a little bit nervous. And so there's a
Right.
adulteration of the test results that happens just from the way that we collect. The last thing is that I like your cortisol should be much higher to start with first thing in the morning, and then kind of ski slope down towards the end of your day. And so when we do a saliva test, we collect at 4 different times during the same day so we can see what your diurnal rhythm is. Most people don't want to go and get their blood drawn 4 times in the same day. I've never actually suggested it, but I'm going to assume that nobody wants that. And so it's a much easier test to administer. You can do it with kids because they can take the kit home and they can spit into the 4 little vials on a Saturday or whenever they have time, and then they FedEx it off to the lab. And that's going to look at cortisol, morning, noon, afternoon, and night. It's also going to look at DHEA, which is the precursor hormone to not only cortisol, but estradiol and testosterone. And then I'll oftentimes look at reproductive hormones at the same time, because really the endocrine system is, there's kind of like 3 main legs of the stool: the thyroid, the reproductive organs, and the adrenals. And usually when there's imbalance in one, we see a teetering in the others. And so I kind of like to look at those things holistically.
Love it. Thank you so much for going through that. I know that that's been a common question.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
in terms of, and also the little spitting in the tubes throughout the day. I did that once. It's really fascinating, and it also is very validating for people who have cortisol issues. I had that was how my practitioner diagnosed me with chronic adrenal fatigue back in 2009, 2010, right around there. I'm not remembering the exact date, but that was right around there. And that's what it validated me because I was having all these symptoms. I had such bad brain fog. I couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I really felt like a prisoner trapped in my own body. I was hungry all the time. I was getting chronic infections. I felt like my body was totally out of control. Every morning I woke up feeling like I had the worst hangover imaginable. And I didn't drink. So I'm like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. What's going on? Why do I feel like I'm like I just woke up with a needle in my arm? I just felt so sick. And the MDs kind of, poo-pooed me and said, this is just, that this is silly. Like, it's all in your head, basically. Um, and then a practitioner said, "Well, let's do a cortisol test." And it came back and she's like, "This is the lowest I've ever seen anyone. Your highest cortisol levels through the day are what normal people are when they sleep." So normal this is of course, of course you of course you feel the way you feel. Look at this test. And that's what helped me to go, "Oh, wow, I can do things with food and with lifestyle and with, nutrition. There's things I can do to help my body. Oh my gosh." The herbs and so that test really helped me get that yes, there's something going on wrong and we can fix it. So these tests are so validating for people who have symptoms, but they can't quite put their finger on it, or maybe an MD's just like, well, here's a pill, here's your pill to wake up, and here's your pill to go to sleep, and that's not really helping. Medicating the symptoms. We got to get to the root cause, and so I love that you address that. Is there anything at home that they can do? Is like so you mentioned some things. Is there like a checklist or something that they can do to sort of help them measure themselves on a daily basis or a weekly basis to check in with themselves?
Because it's really hard to remember yesterday, what I have people do is just jot down a list of 5 to 10 symptoms, quality of sleep, digestion, clarity of mind, whatever how easy was it to get out of bed? What was your mood like? A lot of people will have irritability when there's some adrenal fatigue, and there is a huge spectrum of adrenal fatigue where when we first start getting adrenal burnout, it actually feels kind of good. It kind of feels like um, maybe how we would feel on a race day, like a little bit of extra energy, we're a little extra vital, we're a little bit extra clear. Maybe our sleep isn't disturbed, maybe we have a little bit of fatigue here and there, but it's not consistent. And so we probably wouldn't notice it. And then we kind of have the next stage where we're feeling wired and tired. And so we're starting to feel the effects of that stimulation that doesn't go away. And then what starts happening is our body starts becoming resistant to all the stress. So similar to how our cells will become resistant to insulin after we've had just too much sugar on board for too many years, and we start developing insulin resistance and diabetes, we're going to have a similar thing start happening with cortisol. And so we're going to start requiring more cortisol to stimulate the cells at that same level. And so we're going to start stealing from our sex hormones because, as I said before, that DHEA not only makes cortisol, but it makes testosterone estradiol as well. And so we can see decreases in immunity, our libido drops, maybe we just kind of feel blah about everything, or anhedonia, which is the fancy word for it. And then stage 4, and this is years. This is not something that's going to happen over a matter of weeks. Our cortisol just drops. We can't steal any more from anywhere else, and everything gets low. Our neurotransmitters are low, our sex hormones are low, and that's what you were just describing, this kind of extreme fatigue, apathy, like just can't do anything. And that's when we'll see a lot of the mental stuff as well, like the anxiety, depression, irritability. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that this is a long process. And what I tell my patients when we start doing adrenal repair is that for every year you felt symptomatic, and when we start doing a history, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling this way for 25 years and just didn't really notice. I chalked it up to a new job or having kids or being in grad school or whatever. But we just stop listening to the body because we've decided that it has a bigger job to do and nothing is getting in our way. And that it's going to manifest for you differently than it's going to manifest for me. So like I said, I would just jot down a handful of symptoms and then maybe even use a graph paper, make a little spreadsheet, whatever you're into, and just really simply give yourself a 1 out of 10 rating daily. At the end of every day, just whip through those couple of things. It'll take you 45 seconds. And that way you can start tracking, oh, you know what? Yes, I've been doing this for 4 months, but I started out at a 3 and now I'm feeling like I'm a 5. Because that can be the thing that can be discouraging for people trying to repair their adrenals is it's kind of like when I don't know, I live in a ski town. So when people have an ACL injury or they've had an ACL repair and their doc is like, okay, it's 3 months before you can get back on the mountain, or 6 months. And they're like, well, now I don't have to wear my brace anymore and I have full range of motion. I could just go for it, right? Like maybe a month early. And then that's when we see the most amount of damage, is because we don't have the patience to let our body have enough time to heal. And what I tell my people in that situation, with the ACL repair, or tell my people that I'm working on adrenal repair with, is it's better to give yourself more time than you think you need to fully heal than heal to 80 or 90% and then start from square 1 or square 2.
Absolutely. And the second you start getting more energy, you make these changes, you get more energy. You don't go, oh, great, now I can do this and I can do that. It's like, that's the hardest part, because now we got the energy and we're like a greyhound. We just want to run. And that's when we got to go, great, I've just started to get my energy back. Now let's do something productive that's healing with that energy. Go for a walk, breathe, do some yoga with that energy. That's that you can sort of double down on the benefits of the healing, rather than take that energy and go, okay, now I only need 5 hours of sleep because I'm
Right.
going to
Yep.
work more.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I had one guy I worked with for about 2 years. It took us to get him, back to feeling like, you know what, I don't feel like I have limits now. But it was good 2.5 years. And he likes to race cars, and he's in his 60s, but he likes to race cars and he likes to play in a couple of bands. So he likes to be up late. And he would come in, he's like, oh, I did two of those things in a row and I really wanted to ski this weekend and now I can. And so, we had this long back and forth where he kept on testing the limits of his body because he was so eager to get back to these adrenaline-based activities. And, because they're adrenaline-based activities, one, they feel good. So they, and he was feeling pretty low spirits and depressed for a long time before we had him start feeling better. But then the other thing is they're depleting everything that we're
Hmm.
putting back in. And so, we would always have this conversation of, well, if you want to race 2 days this weekend, just know that probably adds 2 to 4 weeks to your total healing time. And we get to make these choices, these educated decisions around getting back after it. But the world is still going to be here for you, and you will probably learn so much about balance and yourself and what your body actually likes, rather than what your mind thinks your body likes as far as habits and daily patterns
Like
go.
coffee. Oh my gosh, my husband and I gave up coffee recently. I mean, I've gone on and off coffee, my whole adult life, and I'm pretty good off of it, but I notice like, wow, my mind goes, but I want that ritual, right? I want that, and then you go off of it for a week and then you try some coffee, you're like, this stuff tastes disgusting. Well, it's sort of like a
Right.
smoker, right? Smoker quits smoking, and then all of a sudden the smell of smoke is like putrid. They're like, oh, how could I have ever done that? It's disgusting. Or sugar. I got off of sugar and now it's like normal pastries are just like sickly sweet and disgusting. And so because you just neuroadapt, and the things that you thought you needed, like I know what it's like to think I need caffeine and sugar to stay awake and survive, and even just stay awake at the wheel to drive home from work, like, or to stay awake at work and not fall asleep at work. Back when I had, diabetes and chronic adrenal fatigue and all that stuff, I was living off of caffeine and sugar, and now I'm off. This last time when I got off caffeine, it was very interesting to listen to my mind, because this little voice in my mind, this part of me would say, but I'm not going to have enough energy. And this other part of me would say, I know it's not good for me, but I really want it. And so this little voices were like going on, and I would just listen, just observe and go, you know what? I'm going to just see what happens. But there was a belief in my head that said, you can't survive without this. You can't survive without that caffeine. You won't be able to think clearly. You won't be able to wake up in the morning. And I love that, um, after transitioning off of coffee, I wake up in the morning and I have lots of energy because I go to bed earlier, because caffeine, it stays with us throughout the day, and it can actually, just drinking 1 cup in the morning can disrupt our quality of sleep, because it actually it has a half-life, but that stays in the body for sometimes 20 hours. And so it can disrupt the depth of sleep. And now that my husband and I went off coffee, and for the most part caffeine, like we still occasionally would have like a tea or a kombucha or something like that has some very mild, like a green tea or something. But we just notice deeper sleep, we're calmer. And also, now that we've stopped sort of self-medicating with caffeine, we start to listen to our body more around energy. Oh, I need to rest. I need to sit down and take a
Right.
break. Like,
Right.
oh, my body's saying I need to rest. And, that means that like tonight we're not going to go out to the park. Tonight we're going to just stay home and relax. Or tonight, we're going to do something that's more restful for the family. And so it's sort of like someone who has a knee pain, like the ACL, and they constantly take Tylenol. So they're constantly re-injuring it because they're ignoring the pain and pushing through it and injuring it. Well, that's the same with anything that creates artificial energy, like high sugar foods and high sugar drinks, and caffeine are things that overstimulate us. And then we're not really listening to what the body actually is trying to tell us and what the body says we need in the moment. So we go down that road, like you said, that something like stress coupled with these lifestyle choices that are like self-medicating lifestyle choices, like adrenaline activities, sugar, caffeine, in some cases drugs and alcohol, can between the stress and all those things to use self-medicate, they wear down the body to the point where we have infertility, potentially cancer, potentially autoimmune condition, potentially, chronic adrenal fatigue. Definitely do not have the full function of our brain. So we just are really that long-term vision of what we're doing by pushing, and drinking the coffee, eating the chocolate bar or whatever, drinking the power drink, drinking the energy drink, day in, day out. There's going to come a time when we break, and all these diseases you can see the root cause being the not managing of stress, not creating healthy emotional body, right? And then self-medicating with things that are over the counter and completely, legal. That leads to this road of very poor health. And it's very interesting that you pointed out that it can end someone's life 10 years earlier, or it can cut down on our life, but can also cause the last years of our lives to have really poor quality. I know women and men in their 80s who are still snow skiing. And I know women and men in their 70s that can barely walk down the street. And so we need to look at what we're doing now, not only can extend our life or shorten it, but can also determine the quality of life for the last 20 years of our life. Do we want to be in a wheelchair, or do we want to be, really dependent on other people and in a lot of pain in the last 20 years of our life? Or do we want to be, snow skiing to the day we die, right?
Right.
At the ripe old age of 105.
Exactly. And it's not random. I think sometimes we feel a victim to our own health or something like that. Like, oh, this just happened to me. It's like, no, 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 no,
Mm,
no. There you have so much more control. And I think honestly, that's kind of that patriarchal medical community that we have of
mm.
doctor knows best, and you don't know anything. I think Dr. Google and WebMD have shifted that balance of power a little bit because people are more informed. But sometimes that internet rabbit hole isn't always your best friend either. Um,
If you look up your
and
symptoms, you always have cancer. You're like,
oh my God,
you're
it's like,
going
oh
to
my
die.
God, I have this thing that only 5 people get a year. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag, but we're also taught that to not be empowered and to not listen and to push through. And it's fascinating. I read this article about this American woman who was in Germany and she needed a hysterectomy, so a relatively major surgery. And she went and met with her gynecologist, and she said, "Well, what kind of pain meds are you going to give me?" And she's like, "You're not. We don't. I recommend chamomile tea." And the woman was like, I don't what? And so she went to the surgeon, and the surgeon said, "Oh, I mean, really, you shouldn't take any pain medicine. If you really, really need something, you can have a Tylenol, not two, one. And I really recommend chamomile tea." And so this woman is freaking out. She's an American and she's used to, surgery equals heavy, heavy drugs. And the surgeon said, "Listen, if you actually rest until your body tells you to move, you're going to be just fine. But if I give you those pain meds, even after a surgery, you're probably going to get up and lift something that I've told you not to because you're not listening." And the woman, goes back in for her, 2-week checkup, post-surgery, whatever, post-op. And the surgeon says, "So how did you do?" And she said, "I sat on the couch for a day and a half and I didn't move. Like I didn't get myself anything to eat. I didn't move. And I felt fine. And I'm up 2 weeks post-op and I feel totally normal again." And that's
Mm.
what happens when we get out of the way of our body, who knows what she wants to do to get back into balance.
But did she drink the chamomile tea?
I'm pretty sure she did, but that wasn't to help her heal her scars. It was to help her calm down about the fact that she was so med seeking.
Oh, I love it. It's so funny. I'm originally from Canada, and so when I moved here, I this is back when I had these chronic infections, and which now I know why. I mean, between the stress and the eating a really bad diet, I came from eating the standard Canadian diet to the standard American diet, which was like worse than the standard Canadian diet, but still not much worse, but still worse. And all of a sudden, I accessed all this fast food. I was in my 20s. I was a manager of an office, and so I was just like, who has time to cook? I was working 100-hour weeks, and loving it and having so much fun, but totally destroying my body. And I had diabetes and chronic adrenal fatigue on the way. And so I had these chronic infections, and I would just run to this MD that was a friend of a friend. And she said, "Oh, you got to go see this medical doctor. She's great." And she would, "Oh yeah, that's an infection. Here's your antibiotic, and here's your pain meds." And I'm like, it's a sore throat. Like, it's a bad sore throat. It could hurt to
Right.
swallow. But she was just like, here's your antibiotic, here's your pain meds. And every time I even went to um osteopath, I found, because I was starting to become more holistic minded. I'm like, well, then there's an osteo, because I lived in a state that didn't have naturopathic care at the time. And I was telling him about a pain I was having on my ovary. And he was like, "Oh, well, here, let me write a pain med prescription." And he's 5 minutes into the appointment, and he's holding his prescription pad, like, and I'm telling him sort of my history and what's going on. And he's like waiting for me to say a symptom that he can write a drug for, like just waiting. He's like, "Oh, you have pain here. Let me write this." And I'm like, "No, I don't need a pain med. I'm trying to tell you that there's something going on, and I want to like look to see if what's going on." And it's just, luckily it was nothing. It was, it passed, and they did an ultrasound and everything's fine. But it was just a really great experience that in Canada, they do not give out prescription.
Right.
Like you're like, "Oh, you're in pain. I'm sorry. Go home." Like there's no, like, put ice on it. I don't know. I was never once in Canada ever given a pain med for anything. And then I come to the States, and it was every doctor I saw was like waiting to write me a prescription for a pain medicine. And I thought, man, the mentality of it is just it's very interesting. It's a very different healthcare system. But I love that you said that, we can just sit on the couch and heal and listen to the body. And there's so many techniques for decreasing pain. There's so many, mental tricks for decreasing pain. There's lots of natural medicine stuff for decreasing pain, but the pain is there for a reason sometimes, especially when we're recovering from an injury. It's there to tell us that the body wants to heal it, and we need to back off and not put pressure on it. And so it's to thank our body for giving us the signals so we don't injure it further.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Let's come from a place where we're assuming that the body knows what it's doing and say, thank you for letting me know. And thank you for making me sleepy when I need to rest, or, whatever that
Mm.
is.
Now, one part of stress is this inner critic that we have, where we are just criticizing ourselves, especially when we first start to try on these new routines. Like, okay, I'm gonna sit down, and I know there's a laundry piling up, and the kids need this, and my husband needs that, and I have these 10 things I got to do for work. But I'm just gonna sit here, and I'm gonna soak my feet in our magnesium foot soak. That's what we do to calm down. That we've got this wonderful magnesium foot soak. So I would take an hour, and we all sit with our feet
Oh,
in
nice.
it. And,
Lovely.
we get to sit and talk or read a book or whatever, just do nothing and zone out and enjoy it. Or we go sit in the sauna, or, but we just like, no, I know there's things that has to get done, but it's me time now. And when we start to take me time, that little voice goes like, "What are you doing? Like, you don't deserve this," or "This is not, there's stuff to be done. Like, what do you think you're accomplishing here?" Or sometimes we start feeling guilty for being quote unquote lazy because we're taking some me time. So we got this internal chatter criticizing us. And then of course, then we're going, well, how could I possibly be de-stressing where I'm constantly like criticizing myself? So this doesn't feel very unstressful. You have a great ebook that you provide for free on your website. Can you tell us a bit about, so it's all about understanding your inner critic. Can you tell us a bit about this and why listeners should definitely sign up to get your free ebook?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote this kind of out of the work that I do in here with my patients, because that little voice inside your head that you think is so mean and nobody else has. Well, everybody has it. and it's meaner than yours. Um, they're all meaner than the next. And so I wrote this book so that we could actually, because I think we spend so much time and energy trying to shut that voice up, or we run from it or hide from it or push against it, and that is exhausting. And so what I realized through my own journey, but then also there's some really interesting neuroscience that's coming out about the inner critic, that shows us that the inner critic, what that is a part of our brain that lights up when we make a mistake so that we remember it and don't make that mistake again. And so the inner critic, the part of your brain that lights up when your inner critic is talking, is jawing at you, that's actually a part of your brain that's designed to help you learn from your mistakes and do better next time. And what happens with us is that rather than show us that mistake once or twice, the critic who is ignored or abandoned or pushed against or resisted will show it to you dozens or hundreds, if not thousands of times. You remember this? Do you remember this? Remember this? Well, how about now? Do you remember this? Don't forget that you did that and screwed that up. And so this, what's supposed to be a self-protective mechanism that actually helps you to learn and grow from past mistakes or experiences, actually becomes an enemy of the state within us. And so if we were to actually assume that we could trust the inner critic, that the inner critic actually has the same intentions for ourselves that we do, which is this beautiful, happy, vibrant life, and to be successful beyond our wildest dreams, and to love and be loved in the world, but that he's just really anxious that you're going to forget. So that once we start see, it's really hard to have compassion for someone who's saying nasty things about us. But if we were to slow down and say, hey, hold on a second, you're calling me stupid, but what do you really mean? Well, what I really mean is this is a great opportunity and I don't want you to miss out on it. Hey, guess what? This is a great opportunity and I don't want to mess out on it either. I got this. And then all of a sudden the inner critic can calm itself down, can relax into knowing that somebody else is at the wheel. The inner critic thinks that he or she is the only one driving the bus, and so has to hammer the message into the ground because nobody's listening and nobody's actually in communication or in relationship to this part of ourself. And so we start really spinning out on it's just like the part of us that hides and runs from this, and then the inner critic who's like hammering us. But if we were to stop, and it's kind of like if you had someone, let's say at work, that had said something mean and you're like avoiding them, and it just every time you kind of even park your car to come into work, you just kind of get that knot in your stomach and you're trying to figure out how to avoid them at all costs. And do you even have to go into the office today? But it gets worse and worse and worse the longer it goes on. And so it's time to kind of stop and turn and face this part of ourselves that we think actually is mean and cruel. But really, if we slow down and say, what are you really trying to tell me? It's a part of you. It's not trying to tell you that you're stupid. It doesn't want you to miss out on X, Y, and Z. And so that's where we get a sense of, we can breathe into it. We can make some room for him or her, which again, it's like most people that I first introduced this concept are like, if you knew how mean this inner critic was, you would never ask me to make more room for this person. Like they're so mean. But what we do is we can come back into our natural state of being, which is a state of self-awesomeness. If you've ever hung out with a little kid, maybe 6 months old, their toes are the best thing that's ever happened. And they will scream when they want, and they will laugh when they want, and they will sleep and drool on you, and they'll spit up on you, and they've no sense that any of what they've done is not okay, because it's all great. I'm so great just because I'm here. And that's actually our natural state. That's actually your birthright. And so what happens is along the way, we start walking and we start being told no, or don't touch that, or maybe we have a sibling and we took their toy and we get hit over the head for taking their toy. And then we go to school and we have to sit at these desks and act a certain way. We start learning that who we are in our innate selves is not okay. And
Mm.
then that voice, that critic jumps in to help you fit in and get praised by your parents and get loved by your sibling and be acknowledged at school. But all of these things, and you might not have had anything incredibly traumatic happening in childhood, or maybe you did, but either way, we start developing these patterns of relating to ourselves. But it's not to jump on the bandwagon of we're not good enough, it's to push us to be better. And so if you can show up for yourself today, even as an adult, and say, I think you're awesome and everything that you do is okay. And when you get mad at that person, you're allowed to have that response. You don't have to judge yourself. Oh, you should be kinder and nicer. That's how we stay in relationships that don't really work for us. That's how it took me
Mm.
so long to get out of my marriage and a job that was eating me alive, is that I felt like I just shouldn't feel how I felt. But the more we can start touching into, this actually doesn't feel okay, and I'm not okay being around someone who doesn't make me feel okay, or I have a faith in my inherent awesomeness, and I know that I'm all right, and I can choose from a place from within. And then all of a sudden, we start getting inspired action rather than obligation, because most of us often are coming from a place of, this is what I need to be doing, this is what I should do if I'm a good person or a nice person, or if I want friends. Um, this is how I need to act, especially us ladies. We get a lot of messaging and coding from a very young age around landing a partner and how to keep that partner and who we should be and who we shouldn't be. Um, so understanding that inner critic and in a different light, like even as I say this, because I work with my inner critic quite a lot, and she's still there. She's not as intense as she used to be, for sure. But she's, even now, she's like, are you sure you're saying something that people want to listen to? Come to the point, lady. And the point is that as we're in relationship to them, then we can start choosing from a place of self, and we can actually listen. Oh, you know what? Am I rambling on, or am I making a point here? They can actually be an ally for us, because they do bring in a level of judgment and discernment, which we need in order to get what we want in the world. There's nothing wrong with the attributes that the critic brings, but because we work so hard at creating space or ignoring that part of ourselves, he or she just gets louder and louder and louder and louder until
Mm.
we have no choice but to listen. So when we shift that relationship and we choose, hey, I'm right here. What do you want to tell me? They're like, well, God, you're such an idiot. It took you forever to get here. You're like, no, 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 no. What do you really want me to know? Well, I really want you to know that you have all this potential and I really want this opportunity for you. Awesome. I do too. And then it's easier for us to have empathy and compassion and see that part of ourselves as a scared little anxious kid who's just worried that they're not going to make friends, or they're not going to be successful, or they're not going to receive the love that they so desperately crave. And now we're a resourced adult, we can show up and we can offer that to that little one, and that's really what she wants. And then we can have the adult who's in the driver's seat making choices. And when we do that for ourselves, then we easily model that for our children and we break the cycle.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And for the listeners who want to check out that wonderful ebook, they can go to puravitahealthcare.com. That link is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast, learntrail.com, or in the show notes of wherever you're listening, whatever podcast app you use, it'll be in the show notes there. You've got a great clinic in Durango, Colorado, but can people around the world work with you? Do you do Skype counseling?
I do, yeah. I work with people all over the globe, both one-on-one through Skype or like a Zoom call, or I actually have been doing some private retreats and group retreats too, either here or on location. So yeah, wherever you are in the world, if something that I've said has sparked an interest and you want to explore a little deeper, I'd love to work with you.
Very cool. Yeah. Now, and you also have a course that you started it in October and you said you're going to do it again. It's a live training, a 5-month program called Becoming Your Own Best Friend, a 5-month program to tame your inner critic, let go of self-judgment, and lift depression to create an inspired, joyful life. Where could they go to make sure that they're informed about the next time that's available?
Yeah, if you want to go to that same website, the puravitahealthcare.com, and just sign up for our newsletter, and then we'll make sure that you get all of that information. And then I also do a lot of little quick Facebook Live videos on either Dr. Nicola or at Pura Vida Healthcare on Facebook. So if you want to get little reminders and snippets that we all need from time to time, you're welcome to join me there too.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, you know what? You and I, before we hit record, we had a laundry list of things we wanted to cover. We covered some of them, and we covered a bunch of stuff we didn't think we were going to cover, but that's just how it goes. It's just a wonderful conversation. One thing that I just want to make sure we touch on, though, what can people do? What are really effective things they can do in their life to start to decrease stress today?
Sure. I think, the most important thing is to start getting in touch with yourself in a way that you're understanding what's actually driving the stress, and what's driving you to the pressure that you're putting on yourself to do what you're doing. So, step one is becoming aware that there's a problem. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times, like you said, we both work with people all day that don't realize that they're upset or that they're stressed or worried. And so the first thing is to start cultivating this awareness within yourself of, you know what, that bugged me, or I am worried about this meeting tomorrow, or I am feeling some pressure to get these emails done tonight, even though it's 7 o'clock and I'm tired. So step one would be simply acknowledging to yourself, giving yourself permission to notice when you're stressed. I think so many of us fear that if we start acknowledging where we're stressed or out of balance, that we just won't function in the world anymore. Or if we give ourselves permission to rest, that we're just going to lay on the couch and never get off of it. And it's like, no, 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 no. You're inherently a brilliant, motivated person. You might be so tired that if you stop, you would want to lay on the couch for a week, but that's a temporary state of being. And for the vast majority of us, that's not a satisfying way to live a whole life. So just to allay your fears that if you start touching into these things, they're not going to overwhelm you and they're not going to derail you. You will start receiving more and more and more of what you want, and to be totally honest, beyond what you thought possible, as you start getting more and more in alignment with yourself and give yourself more and more permission to listen to what's happening in your body. So step one, take a deep breath. Acknowledge, wow, I'm feeling stressed or emotional or upset or whatever. And then let yourself have it. Let yourself really feel into whatever that thing is. Like, okay, without judgment, I let myself be really worried about this thing that maybe my mind says I shouldn't be so worried about, or another part of me says, get over it because it's just got to get done. I'm just going to give myself more space to feel how I feel. And then let that part of you identify it as a part, because a lot of times we say I'm anxious or I'm stressed. There's a part of me that's feeling stressed about this. So just kind of separate it out a little bit so that it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. And then call in yourself, with a capital S, your adult, and take it by the hand, this part of you, and say, I'm right here for you, and it's okay. It's okay to feel however you feel. And I'll pause it there because I think that's enough for folks to chew on. And that in and of itself will inherently shift how you're relating to whatever is stressing you out. And you'll probably be inspired with a way that you could do it differently.
Beautiful. And if listeners are inspired by you today, they can work with you no matter where they are around the world. They could hire you as their coach or their physician and work with you. And I love that you address the mental, emotional, and physical aspects of their health, because we're not just a physical body. We're not just a meat sack walking around. There's so much more to us. We need to work on all of it. So I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. Is there anything left unsaid? Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's show?
Just that I really appreciate each and every one of you that are listening, because I know that this stuff is hard, and I know that we tend to think that we need the next book or the next retreat or the next breathing method or whatever. But promise you, all that's required is more of you. And the more you can connect into yourself and become friends with you, the more ease you will feel almost immediately. So, and then you can choose, oh, this book looks interesting. I'm going to read it because it piques my curiosity, not because you feel like you're something broken with you and that you need to fix it. So you might still read the same book, but the intention is totally different, and you'll receive that information completely differently.
Beautiful. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love to have you back anytime you want to come teach us something.
I would, yeah.
Yes.
I'd love that. That'd be great.
Okay. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic true health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program.